UFC President Dana White wasn't happy about having to take Aspen Ladd out of contract, but after many misses on the scale, he revealed that the promotion was left with no choice. But why was it so tough for Ladd to make weight? Was it fair that she was totally kicked off the UFC? Stay tuned and you'll find out. Let's dive right into it. First off, looks like White ran out of patience. White not only announced that the female fighter was being taken off the contract, he also refused the chance of again sending her back to the featherweight division following her third miss at bantamweight. He also said that he couldn't give her any more chances, she'd already used up all of them. And so, as a result, her fight with Sara McMann has also been canceled. We tried to work with her. She's a great kid, the UFC president spoke about it at the post-fight press conference for the DWCS Season 6 finale. It's never fun when you have somebody who's actually talented. She's a talented fighter, but part of the job is making weight. Ladd didn't manage to do that in her latest trip to the UFC scale. She again weighed in 2 pounds overweight for a non-title bout with Sara McMann that had already been rescheduled. Before that, she was also defeated in back-to-back fights in meetings with Norma Dumont and Raquel Pennington, the former being a 145-pound contest booked for another weight problem. Next up, Ladd has a history of weight misses. There also came a time when the California State Athletic Commission temporarily suspended Ladd's license to fight at bantamweight, requiring her to submit extensive medical documentation before being permitted to fight at 135 pounds. White continued, talking about how she's not made weight way too many times. This was inevitable. He didn't want to take her out, but his hands were tied. Ladd has yet to say anything on her release from UFC, which was in the news on Tuesday after the algorithm-based Twitter account UFC Roster Watch hinted she'd been taken off from the active list. She did earn a UFC record of 4-3, briefly earning herself some title talk after a 3-fight winning streak in her early octagon career. Now, does Ladd deserve this? Previously, UFC has forced regular weight missers to either permanently shift up a division or even cut them off from the promotion totally. Everyone predicted for quite some time that Ladd would be facing one of these fates eventually, so now that it's happened, no one's surprised. You can argue that a fair policy for UFC would be the classic 3 strikes and you're out. It looks like that is the case. She hasn't been able to fight at all since signing with UFC. Every fight that was scheduled somehow didn't end up happening. Here's why she has trouble making weight. While the female fighter hasn't had a chance to comment on her being cut just yet, she did have something to say at the weight miss she had before this one. At her previous weight miss, she was also 137 pounds. But the weight miss wasn't the worst thing. That would be Ladd's appearance, as the Californian was obviously unstable and had trouble standing on the scale. This was also not the only time Ladd looked near death on weigh-in day. After getting a bit better, she went to Instagram to give a statement explaining that her body just couldn't take off any more weight because of menstruation. Her attempts to make the weight left her at her absolute lowest, and it was hell for her. Besides that, Ladd wrote that her opponent, Macy Chiasson, chose to refuse the fight rather than take on a heavy opponent, and that's also totally fine. Next up, Sara McMann had something to say. Of course, when something like this happens, everyone in the UFC has an opinion on it. Sara McMann was almost Ladd's opponent, but for now it seems that the fight just wasn't meant to be. Sara McMann was among the first fighters to step on the scale that day and weigh in for her fight versus Aspen Ladd that was scheduled for UFC Vegas 60 on Saturday. The Olympic silver medalist weighed in at 135 pounds, and she was all ready to fight. That was until her rival weighed in at 138 pounds, which is a whole 2 pounds over the bantamweight limit. It was a very familiar story with Ladd, who has had a lot of trouble on the scales in scheduled appearances against Germaine de Randamie, Leslie Smith, and Macy Chiasson. Similar to Smith and Chiasson, McMann also didn't get to see Ladd in the octagon as planned. She shared her thoughts on her rival coming in heavy for their fight. It's something she views as cheating. She also suggested a new policy should be put in place in order to prevent this type of situation in the future. She said she was really disappointed at how things played out. She herself never once missed weight in her career in either fighting or wrestling. That's the same as cheating for her. Every pound you get to keep gives you an advantage, and she really wants better policies so that this sort of thing never happens. Finally, is there any solution to this? Because this is now the 3rd time Ladd has missed weight in her UFC career, a permanent move to featherweight could be considered too, but looks like White just didn't want to give her any more chances. The 27-year-old had fought in UFC only once before, and that fight resulted in the unanimous decision loss to Norma Dumont at UFC Vegas 40 last October. It's true that periods have been the reason many female fighters have issues in making weight, but Ladd's circumstances look like they're more than bad luck. We can't simply forget her previous 2 weight misses. Maybe it's time to accept that Ladd is just too big for the division. Seeing how Amanda Nunes is the champion either way, and featherweight has very few fighters, moving up in in weight would definitely have been the solution, that is, besides cutting her altogether. Other related news. Here's why Eddie Alvarez left ONE Championship. Eddie Alvarez was happy with his decision to sign with ONE Championship, but seeing his career and contract are wrapping up, the ex-UFC lightweight champion decided to try and make an amicable exit from the UFC. Alvarez also revealed that he and ONE Championship found a way to do just that, but he was still vague as to the reasoning behind it until now. He said on an episode of the MMA Hour that he wants to complete his career in his home country. He talked to his agent about it, and when they both sat down with ONE, they came up with the idea that they should shift to the US. Everything was in order, but when the pandemic started, all those plans were put on pause, but they're once again underway. Chris Barnett talks about his weight issue and cheek injury. UFC 279 commentators couldn't help but wonder about the appearance of Chris Barnett's face in the middle of his prelim fight with Jake Collier. They were concerned, as were we. It seemed like a really bad injury. They thought it was either a stroke or nerve damage. It wasn't nearly that bad, but it also certainly wasn't fun for Barnett, who made it through the early trouble to then create highlight reels with his usual flip celebration. Barnett revealed that Jake had caught him in his cheek, and it was so bad a whole chunk of his cheek tore from the inside and was hanging in his mouth. That's why the left side of his face looked so off. He also couldn't bite it because it would be sort of like taking a butter knife and attempting to slash through a steak with the mouthpiece in. He bit down on one of those punches and accidentally bit another chunk. Ouch, that's got to hurt. We wouldn't want to see the inside of his cheek at that moment. Fortunately, the injury also healed just as fast as it appeared. Finally, Michael Chandler thinks Makhachev still has a long way to go. Chandler knew that even though Makhachev has a lot of accomplishments in Bellator MMA, he will still have to prove himself after signing his contract with the UFC. He's done that multiple times. Let's not forget, all 4 of his fights came against top 10 ranked competition, which included 3 rivals who have managed to keep at least a piece of the lightweight title while bagging 3 performance bonuses and 2 knockouts along the way. Understanding that he can't just keep getting by through his past accolades, Chandler purposely requested the UFC for the biggest fights against the toughest fighters as soon as he signed with the promotion, and that's pretty much what he's faced so far. This is also why Chandler isn't fully convinced of the hype created around top-ranked lightweight contender Islam Makhachev, who will be going up against Charles Oliveira with the 155-pound title at stake at UFC 280 in October. Even though Makhachev is presently riding the wave of a 10-fight unbeaten streak, Chandler can quickly analyze his resume with questions about the quality of competition those wins were against. And we must say, he has a point. But if Islam wins against Oliveira, all those doubts will be wiped clean. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think Aspen deserved to be cut from the UFC? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.